In the rhythm of modern life, our minds are rarely allowed to truly rest. Thoughts pile upon one another, questions that have not yet settled are replaced almost immediately by new anxieties. Even when night arrives and the body grows tired, consciousness keeps running as if it has forgotten how to stop. This video is a very gentle invitation, not an invitation to understand more, but to become lighter. In the hidden universe, dark matter, aliens, and cosmic mysteries, explained gently, we step together into a slow journey where the universe is not presented as a lesson, but as a mirror reflecting the inner landscape of the human mind. Amid the darkness of invisible matter, amid the silence of the stars, we touch familiar questions. Who are we? Where do we stand within this vast picture? And why is it that sometimes not knowing at all can bring a sense of peace, as Carl Sagan once said? We are a way for the universe to know itself. You do not need to remember this. Just listen. Let each thought drift by softly. Let your breathing slow, and allow the universe both outside you and within you to be told in a whisper, gentle and deep enough for sleep to find its own way to you. That night began like so many others in the long history of observing the universe. There were no stage lights, no grand moment anyone was waiting for. Only a quiet room, lines of numbers flowing steadily across printed paper, and a single human being listening to something the naked eye could never touch. July 1977. Late at night. A radio telescope pointed toward a patch of sky in the constellation of Sagittarius. And then, for 72 brief seconds, a signal appeared. Not like background noise, not like the familiar murmurs of the cosmos. It was strong enough to make the observer stop. Not out of fear, but out of astonishment. On the data printout, a very human, very simple word was written: wow. No one knows exactly what happened in that moment. No one can say for certain whether it was a greeting or merely a rare coincidence of nature. And perhaps it is precisely because there is no answer that the moment is still alive today. In the modern world, we are used to demanding explanations. Every phenomenon must have a cause. Every question must yield a clear answer. When we do not understand, we feel uneasy. When we cannot control, we grow anxious. But that night, the universe offered no explanation. It only touched very lightly. A signal arrived, and then it left, without repeating, without confirming, without denying, much like many moments in our inner lives. There are feelings that arise almost imperceptibly, a nameless sadness, a passing thought, a vague intuition that something larger exists beyond what we can see. And then, because we are too busy, we miss it. Not because it is unimportant, but because we are no longer there to listen. Philosophy has long recognized moments like these, not as events to be proven, but as small openings in awareness, places where human beings begin to question themselves. Martin Heidegger once wrote in Being and Time, "The most thought-provoking thing in our thought-provoking time is that we are still not thinking, not because we lack information, but because we rarely stop long enough." The wow signal did not immediately change science. It did not open a new era. It did not prove the existence of someone out there. But it did something else quieter. It reminded us that the universe has no obligation to speak in ways we understand, and that human beings do not always need answers in order for meaning to exist. In depth psychology, Carl Jung called moments like these encounters with the numinous experiences that feel sacred, not because they are supernatural, but because they exceed the familiar structures of reason. They arrive unannounced. They do not stay long. But once they touch us, they leave a deep resonance behind. That night of observation was not loud. There was no cheering, no hurried conclusion. Only a human being in the stillness of the universe realizing that something different had just been heard. Perhaps what makes the wow signal special does not lie in its origin, but in the deeply human response to what cannot be understood, not trying to possess it, not rushing to explain it, simply acknowledging it and letting it remain. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be content with what you have, rejoice in the way things are," not as a surrender of the search, but as learning not to tense ourselves before what cannot yet be grasped. Tonight, as you listen to this story, you do not need to believe that the signal came from somewhere far away. You do not need to decide whether the universe is speaking to humanity or not. You only need to be here in a quiet moment, allowing questions to exist without answers. Just as the universe did in those 72 brief seconds, your mind too can be allowed to whisper something entirely its own and then gently withdraw, leaving no evidence behind, only the feeling that perhaps not everything important needs to be explained. And in that gentle acceptance, the body may begin to loosen, the breath may slow, consciousness no longer has to strain to understand. It only needs to listen as the observer did that night, in the dark, in the silence, allowing the universe and yourself to simply be. After those 72 seconds when the signal arrived and then withdrew like an almost imperceptible breath, the night did not end. It simply shifted into another state, quieter, deeper. Inside the observation room, everything continued to function. Paper kept printing, the needle kept moving, and the telescope kept doing exactly what it was built to do, scanning the sky according to the slow, steady rotation of the Earth. Big Ear, its name sounding more like a metaphor than a machine, a great ear built to listen to the universe. Yet even that ear could not remain still. It depended on the turning of this planet on a motion that no creature on its surface can ever stop. And so, after the signal appeared, Big Ear could not turn back at once. It could not say, "Please repeat it." It could not ask the universe to slow down just a little. That patch of sky had already moved on, and if anything else was said, we were no longer there to hear it. There is something deeply human hidden in that technical detail. We often assume we miss things because we lack information, lack tools, lack intelligence, but sometimes we miss them simply because we cannot stay long enough. Philosophy recognized this very early on, not as a flaw to be fixed, but as an inseparable feature of the human condition. In The Gay Science, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "The most subtle and insidious form of slavery is the belief that one has already found the truth. We want certainty. We want to return. We want confirmation. We want to frame experience inside a clear conclusion. But the universe, like our inner life, rarely operates that way. Big Ear was not designed for patience, not because humans lacked wisdom, but because every tool is born within limits. It observes one thin slice of the sky, then releases it, then moves on. Just like consciousness itself, we cannot remain inside a single moment. We cannot hold a feeling unchanged. We cannot stop the stream of thought and say, "Do not move." Perhaps you have known moments like this. A profound thought appearing just as you are about to fall asleep. A deeply real feeling during a rare moment of stillness. And then, because you shift slightly, it dissolves. Not because it lacked importance, but because you Big Ear cannot stay fixed at the same point in space-time. In being and nothingness. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Consciousness is always consciousness of something. Awareness is always reaching outward, always flowing, always in motion. And for that very reason, it cannot hold everything it touches. This often makes us uneasy. We fear that if we do not understand immediately, if we do not remember, if we do not return at the right moment, meaning will be lost. But perhaps meaning does not function like data. Perhaps the universe did not need Big Ear to remain. and perhaps that signal did not need confirmation in order to complete its role. Carl Jung once wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Not everything that appears needs to be illuminated at once. Some things only need permission to pass through." Big Ear listened, and then it continued to turn, without regret, without self-reproach for an imperfect design. Only humans looking back begin to ask, if only we could have turned back then. If only we had been more patient. But healing philosophy does not begin with if. It begins with acceptance. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, not as resignation, but as a deep, steady breath." Tonight, as you listen to this story, you may be carrying a familiar desire to understand more clearly, to be more certain, to grasp something before it drifts away. But notice how the narration is slowing, not pushing, not demanding. Like Big Ear, you do not need to remain still. You only need to have listened. If something is important, it is not lost simply because you could not hold it. It may return in another form at another time, or it may not return at all, and that too is acceptable. In the impatience of the instrument, there is a very gentle lesson. Not every limit is a failure. Some limits simply remind us that we do not need to hold the entire universe in order to feel at peace. As the need to know for sure softens, your body may relax more deeply. The mind no longer has to cling to every thought. And like the sky passing overhead above Big Ear, your awareness can drift without a destination, just letting the night continue, as it always has. After accepting that our instruments cannot remain long enough, that there is no way to return to that precise moment, human beings did not stop listening. We simply changed the way we search. When the sky is too vast to wait for a repeated call, when there is no fixed coordinate to anchor ourselves to, the only remaining strategy is to scan broadly, not to stand still at a single point, not to hope for repetition, just to move quietly across region after region of sky, like someone casting a net into an immense ocean, knowing that an entire lifetime may pass without ever pulling up what they are looking for. This is not impatience. It is another form of patience. The patience of one who understands that they are searching within a sea far too wide. If signals exist, they do not arrive as clear speech. They come as echoes, faint, brief, and easily dissolved into the background noise of the universe. Much like the deepest thoughts of the human mind, they rarely appear when we deliberately seek them. They arrive when we are not waiting and depart before we can hold them. Perhaps this is why the search beyond Earth always carries something profoundly human. Not because we are certain we will find someone out there, but because the act of searching itself is a way of being. In Fragments, Heraclitus wrote, "Nature loves to hide. Not only the nature that lies beyond us, but the nature of inner life as well. We scan the sky widely because we cannot remain long enough at a single point. We listen in many directions because no place promises an answer." This may sound exhausting, and yet, strangely, when we release the demand for a definite answer, the search becomes lighter. There is no longer the pressure to succeed, no longer the fear of missing the decisive moment. Only a slow, even movement like breathing. Modern life often confuses patience with stillness. We believe that if we do not hold tightly to one point, meaning will slip away. That if we do not remain long enough, truth will pass us by. But the universe offers a lesson in the opposite direction. It does not ask us to stay still. It asks us to be humble. When we scan widely, we admit that we do not know where the signal will come from. When we listen in many directions, we accept that we are not the center of the story. And in that humility, the mind begins to soften. There are nights when you lie there, thoughts drifting from one thing to another, never staying long enough to become a conclusion. You may have blamed yourself. If only I could focus more. If only I could stay still longer. But try seeing it differently. Perhaps your mind is doing exactly what it needs to do, scanning broadly, not clinging, not trying to hold. In the cloud of unknowing, an anonymous medieval contemplative text, there is a quiet insight that human beings do not approach truth by accumulating, but by releasing what cannot be grasped. The search for signals beyond Earth is much the same. There is no complete map, no marked destination, only a slow movement through the unknown. And perhaps that is why those signals resemble echoes rather than words. They do not come to be kept. They come to remind us that something has passed through. We may miss something because we did not stay long enough. But it is also possible that if we stayed too long, we would miss other directions. Truth is not always found at the center. Sometimes it only brushes the edges of awareness. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." Not every movement is disorder. Some movements are simply life searching for its own shape. When we accept scanning broadly, we allow uncertainty to exist without tension. We no longer demand that every night deliver an answer. There is no pressure for every thought to arrive somewhere. Like scientists listening to the sky, you can listen to yourself without expecting anything to appear. If an echo comes, let it sound and fade. If nothing comes at all, that is not emptiness. In this slow rhythm of narration, there is no goal to reach, no secret to solve, only a steady flow between searching and releasing. And when the mind no longer tries to remain fixed at a single point, it can begin to rest, like someone standing on the deck of a ship in the night sea, not staring at one star, but letting the sky drift across their vision. In that unforced, patient sleep arrives not as an ending, but as a natural continuation. There is nothing to be found, only the simple fact that you have listened. After growing accustomed to scanning widely, to not anchoring ourselves to a single point, the search gradually slows. It is no longer a movement outward, but a very gentle step back, so we can look again at what is most familiar. The universe as we see it. The universe that appears each time we lift our eyes to the night sky. Scattered stars, planets drifting in silence, the faint, luminous bands of distant galaxies. This is the part of the universe that makes human beings feel safe. Not because it is small, but because it appears. Only about 5%. Yet it is the 5% we can see, measure, and name. The 5% that allows us to tell stories. Everything we know about distance, about motion, about the history of the universe begins with light. Light touching the eye, light imprinting itself on sensors, light carrying ancient information, having left its place of origin millions or billions of years ago. When you look at a star, you are not seeing the present. You are seeing a memory, a signal that has traveled an immense distance through cold space to arrive at this exact moment. There is something deeply gentle in that thought. What we see is never in a hurry. It has waited a very long time to be seen. Philosophy has long been drawn to light, not only as a physical phenomenon, but as a metaphor for knowing. Plato once told the story of the cave where human beings see only shadows and believe them to be the whole of reality. But here we do not need to leave the cave. We only need to recognize that what we see is always a part, never the whole. In Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, Ludwig Wittgenstein wrote, "The limits of my language mean the limits of my world." Light is the universe's first language, and our world is drawn in that language. We live in a universe illuminated just enough to see. enough not to panic, enough to feel that we are not entirely lost. Perhaps that is why, when everything becomes too vague, human beings return to what can be seen. Numbers, images, familiar stars. This is not avoidance. It is a very natural need of the mind. William James once wrote in The Varieties of Religious Experience, "Our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness. Our waking awareness needs footholds, and light provides them. Planets moving along their orbits, galaxies slowly turning through space, laws repeating with enough regularity for us to trust that the world has order. Within this familiar portion of the universe, everything seems understandable, at least step by step. And that feeling brings reassurance, not because we understand everything, but because we know we are seeing something real. When you listen to stories of stars and galaxies, the body often relaxes. There is less tension than when facing what is completely invisible. There are images to imagine. There is light to hold on to, like recalling a clear memory amid the blurred regions of recollection. Yet even within this familiarity, a quiet truth is whispered. Everything we know comes from what has reached us. Not from the whole of reality, but from the part that managed to touch us. In Phenomenology of Perception, Maurice Merleau-Ponty wrote, "The world is not what I think, but what I live through. We do not live in the universe as it is. We live in the universe as light has delivered it to us." This does not make our experience less meaningful. On the contrary, it makes it deeply human, because inner life is the same. What we are aware of is only a small portion of what is happening within. Clear thoughts, named emotions, bright memories. They are the 5% of the mind, the part sufficient for orientation, sufficient for telling ourselves a story about who we are. And like the universe, we often feel safer staying with that part. Tonight, as the rhythm of the narration continues to slow, you do not need to go any farther. You can rest here among familiar stars within light that has traveled a long way to reach you. There is no need to ask large questions, no need to step into what has not yet been seen. Simply allow your mind to be bathed in the gentle light of familiarity. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." And perhaps in this moment, the light you are listening to does not come from the stars, but from somewhere very near where awareness is slowing and no longer needs to travel farther. The current will continue, but without haste. Because sometimes, to prepare to enter the darkness, we need to linger for a long while in familiar light. After lingering long enough within the familiar part of the universe among light form and things that can be named, the current of the story begins to drift toward another region, not abruptly, not fearfully, just a gentle step across a very soft boundary where light gradually thins and certainty begins to dissolve. The remaining 95%, a number that sounds abstract, yet contains nearly the entirety of the universe, not what we see, not stars, planets, or galaxies, but what does not appear, leaving only the faintest traces in the motion of everything else. Dark matter, dark energy, names that sound as if they belong to a myth, yet simply reflect a very plain truth: we have not seen them yet. Not because they are hiding, but because human senses and instruments were never born to touch them. Dark matter does not emit light. It does not reflect light. It offers no image, and yet it gives shape to the universe like an invisible framework, keeping galaxies from flying apart, keeping stars from drifting away. Dark energy is different. It does not hold. It pushes. It pushes space to expand, causing the universe to grow faster, like a breath that is becoming deeper and deeper. Both are unseen. yet both are decisive. There is something quietly strange in this truth. The most powerful things are often the most invisible. Philosophy has known this for a very long time, not through telescopes, but through lived experience. Spinoza wrote in Ethics, "That which is infinite cannot be grasped by the finite." There are things that do not need to be seen in order to be believed as present. We live in a world upheld by forces we are not conscious of each day. Gravity time, meaning the invisible bonds between human beings. Dark matter and dark energy are not as alien as they seem. They simply make clearer a very human truth. What is unseen is often what holds everything together. In your inner life, what is holding you in place? Not the thoughts you can name, not the stories you tell about yourself, but deeper currents. Wordless beliefs, blurred memories, yet strong enough to shape how you move through the world. Carl Jung wrote in The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." The universe is similar. As long as we cannot see its invisible part, we observe only the effects and call them laws. Yet what is remarkable is this science is not frightened by what cannot be seen. It does not turn away. It quietly says we do not yet know. And within that sentence there is a rare and beautiful humility. No one claims the universe becomes frightening simply because most of it does not appear. On the contrary, that invisibility makes the universe deeper, like a piece of music composed not only of notes that are heard, but also of silences. Martin Heidegger wrote in What is Metaphysics? "The nothing itself nothings. Nothingness is not empty. It acts, it shapes, it allows what is to appear in its own way." Dark matter does not need to be fully understood to do its work. Dark energy does not need to be precisely named to keep space expanding. And perhaps your inner life is the same. You do not need to understand every feeling in order to be at peace. You do not need to illuminate every dark corner in order to rest. Some parts of you only need to be acknowledged as existing. In this slow current of narration, the invisible 95% does not appear as a threat. It appears as a deep ground, a space wide enough for everything else to unfold. You are lying there listening to things that cannot be seen, and your body may begin to recognize something very familiar. You are still being held. Not by clear thoughts, but by a steady breath. A sense of safety without explanation. A stream of awareness slowing down. Just as galaxies are held together by dark matter, your mind is also held by things you do not need to name. And just as dark energy pushes the universe to expand, sleep too is gently opening within you without force, without control. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Not everything true needs to be spoken." Tonight, you do not need to understand what dark matter is. You do not need to imagine how dark energy works. You only need to sense that there are invisible forces quietly doing their gentle work, holding, pushing, allowing everything to unfold. And within that allowance, you can softly release the need to see clearly, the need to understand everything. The current will continue deeper still, but without haste. Because once you grow familiar with this gentle darkness, light will no longer be the only condition for feeling safe. It is enough to know that even within what cannot be seen, the universe, and you are being held very softly. After growing familiar with the presence of invisible forces, those that give the universe its structure and quietly push it to expand, the story does not end there. It continues to drift, just as space itself drifts. There was a time when human beings believed the universe would eventually grow tired. After its eruption, it would cool. After expanding, it would slow down. Like every familiar motion in daily life, a thrown object eventually falls, a flame eventually fades. This belief is deeply human. We are accustomed to closed arcs, to the idea that everything must ultimately come to rest. But the universe chose a different path. Distant observations reveal that galaxies are not merely moving away from one another, they are separating faster over time. Not because they are accelerating through space, but because space itself is expanding. Space giving birth to more space. Distance stretching on its own, with no center left to hold everything together. This idea can feel unsettling, but if you stay with it long enough, it begins to carry a very different feeling: lightness. Nothing is being violently pushed away. There is no new explosion, only a steady drifting without a destination. In Process and Reality, Alfred North Whitehead wrote, "The essence of the universe is process. The universe is not an object traveling from point A to point B. It is an unfolding. And that unfolding has no obligation to slow down simply because we are accustomed to slower rhythms. There is something here that closely resembles inner life. We often expect that after a period of tension, things will calm down. After a disruption, the mind will settle. Yet sometimes life does not slow. It simply changes the shape of its movement. Dark energy is not like a pulling force. It does not hold. It does not embrace. It does not cling. It simply allows space to keep opening, like a deep breath that is not forced to end. Perhaps this is why this chapter carries a feeling of non-attachment. Not surrender, but not clinging to an old rhythm. We often believe stability means stillness, but the universe reminds us that stability can also be a smooth, even drift. In Being and Nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Man is condemned to be free. There is no pre-given stopping point, only motion and the responsibility of not clinging to a fixed form of oneself. When space generates more space, nothing is left behind. Everything moves farther apart, yet nothing is lost. Distance increases not through separation, but because the ground itself is opening." Perhaps this is the gentlest way to think about change. Not as loss, but as expansion. Not as leaving what is familiar, but as allowing the familiar more room to breathe. In personal life, when things do not slow, as we hope, we often grasp more tightly. We try to control, we try to preserve yesterday's shape. But dark energy does not do this. It does not resist. It does not argue with gravity. It simply exists, and through that existence, everything else adapts. In The Wisdom of Insecurity, Alan Watts wrote, "The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. The universe does not resist drifting. It is the drift." And as you hear this in the night, your mind may begin to recognize that it does not need to cling to every thought in order to feel safe. You do not need to make everything slow. You only need to move with the rhythm. Expanding space does not ask galaxies to do anything at all. They simply are. And that is enough. Sleep is the same. It does not arrive when you try to pull it closer. It arrives when you allow consciousness more room. When you stop holding on to a thought, an image, a worry. When you let them move apart gently without drama. Perhaps the universe will continue expanding forever. Perhaps it will end in coldness, or in a form no one yet knows. But tonight, that does not matter. What matters is this: you do not need to slow down in order to rest. You only need not to cling. Just as space opens on its own, your mind can open as well, without aiming toward anything, without fleeing from anything. Simply a very gentle drift. And within that drift, there is no requirement to understand, no task to complete, only a soft movement carrying you deeper into this night. The current will continue, but without force. Because when the universe does not slow down, it does not leave you behind. It simply shows that peace is not about stopping, but about allowing yourself to drift with reality. After allowing yourself to drift with expansion without clinging, without grasping, without trying to slow it down, the current of the story begins to turn backward, not to search for a final cause, but to touch the most ancient memory the universe still carries. If dark energy is the breath opening toward the future, then the Big Bang is the trace of an intensely hot beginning, a moment when everything was layered upon itself within a point so small that distance itself did not yet exist. Not an explosion in the familiar sense, no center, no fragments flying outward, only space bringing itself into being, and time beginning to find its rhythm. The universe was once very bright. Not the light of stars, but the light of space itself, while it was still hot, dense with energy. When we say a very long time ago, we usually think of centuries or perhaps thousands of years. But the cosmic microwave background is light that left its source nearly 13.8 billion years ago and is still arriving here even now. Each time you look up at the night sky, you are not only seeing stars, you are looking into ancient messages sent when the universe was still young. Light is always the past. It needs time to reach us, and so every observation is a kind of remembrance. In A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking wrote, "Looking out into the universe is looking back in time." That sentence is not only true for astronomy, it is also true for the mind. When we remember a moment in our lives, we do not return to it intact. We touch its trace, a version that has cooled, that has expanded, that has been filtered by time. The universe is the same. After the Big Bang, as space expanded and cooled, light was finally able to separate from matter. That was the moment the cosmic microwave background was born, a faint, steady wave filling every direction. It carries no information about shape. It tells no stories of individual stars. It only whispers, "I was once very hot. I was once very bright. And I have traveled very far to arrive here." The feeling of this chapter is not drama, it is nostalgia. Like remembering a time before anxiety had a name, before loss had language. The universe at that time had no stars, no planets, no life. Yet it was full of energy, full of potential. And then as the universe continued to expand, light was stretched along with it. Wavelengths lengthened, temperature fell. This phenomenon is called redshift. Not because everything is running away, but because the space beneath it is swelling. Light does not disappear. It simply becomes gentler, like memory. It does not vanish. It only changes color. In Time and Free Will, Henri Bergson wrote, "The past does not cease to exist. It simply ceases to be useful." The universe does not forget the Big Bang. It carries its trace in every wandering photon. And we small creatures in the night can still listen. Not with our ears, but with instruments delicate enough to receive the steady whisper of origin. There is something deeply comforting in knowing that the universe was once uniform, undivided, without distance. Everything was closer together than we can imagine. And then, from that small, hot point, everything separated. Not in haste, not in chaos, simply by opening. We often ask, why is there something rather than nothing? But the Big Bang does not answer that question. It only says, there was once a time when everything was very near. Perhaps that is why this chapter carries such an ancient feeling. Not because it speaks of a distant event, but because it touches a deep longing for primordial connection. In the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel wrote, "The true is the whole." The universe did not begin as fragments. It began as an undifferentiated whole. And in the night when your mind is tired from too many divisions, work and rest, right and wrong, should and should not, the thought of a time when everything was seamless can bring a genuine softness. You do not need to understand the Big Bang. You only need to feel that everything you are was once very close to everything else. Every atom in you was once part of that hot state, once vibrated within that light, once traveled billions of years to arrive here. And now, as the universe has cooled, as light has softened, you can allow yourself to cool as well, not to disappear, only to grow gentler. Just as light was stretched into microwave waves, consciousness too can stretch into a softer state. No need to remember. No need to reason. Just to be here in a very long night, told through the remaining traces of a beginning that has traveled very far to whisper to you, you did not come from nothing. You came from a point of great brightness that learned how to become light. And as the story continues to drift toward even deeper questions about before, about time, about the limits of knowing, you do not need to keep up. The memory of the universe does not require you to be awake. It only asks that you listen in sleep, as light listened to space for 13.8 billion years in order to arrive here. After listening to the universe's ancient memory, the lingering waves of light from a time that was once intensely hot, intensely bright, the story naturally carries us to another threshold, not a threshold of distance, but a threshold of thought. Here a question arises, very softly, yet persists like a whisper in the night. Does before truly exist? What was there before the Big Bang? Before the moment when everything began to open outward, was there another moment waiting? Science calls this boundary the Planck era, a span of time so brief that all familiar units of measurement dissolve. Shorter than a billionth of a second, smaller than any intuition human beings have ever possessed. Their equations cease to function, time no longer flows, space no longer provides a background, cause and effect no longer stand in a straight line. Not because we are not intelligent enough, but because our familiar logic was born after that point. We are accustomed to living inside continuities before and after, beginning and end, cause and consequence. But the Planck era does not speak that language. Stephen Hawking once wrote in A Brief History of Time, "Because there is a law such as gravity, the universe can and will create itself from nothing." This sentence does not close the question, it opens an acceptance that some things do not require a before in order to exist. In modern physics, as we approach the origin point, time is no longer a straight line. It may curve, it may blur, or it may not exist in any way we recognize. And when time no longer exists, the word before loses its meaning. This can feel unsettling because the human mind likes to hold on to reference points. It likes to know where everything comes from. It likes to place a chair behind every story. But here the universe invites us to do something else, to set the question down rather than carry it farther. In Being and Nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Nothingness lies coiled in the heart of being like a worm." Nothingness does not stand outside existence, it rests within it. The Planck era is not emptiness. It is a state in which the distinction between being and non-being has not yet been drawn. Like deep sleep, when you cannot say whether you are thinking or not thinking, existing or not existing. You simply are. There is a very quiet kind of healing in this idea that not every question needs an answer, that not everything unclear is a deficiency. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao." There are things which, when we try to name them, we pull away from their true nature.
When we ask what came before the Big Bang, we may be carrying a habit that no longer belongs to where we are standing. Because before is a concept of time, and time itself may have appeared only after the Big Bang. It is strange and yet very gentle. If there is no before, then nothing has been missed. No secret has been hidden. There is simply an origin that does not require a history. In Confessions, Augustine of Hippo once wrote, "What then is time? If no one asks me, I know if I wish to explain it to one that asketh, I know not." Time is something we live within but cannot step outside of in order to explain. The universe is the same. We are inside it, not observers standing before it. When science reaches the Planck era, it does not fail. It simply stops at the right place. And that stopping is not an impasse, but a gentle reminder. Sometimes knowing enough means knowing when to stop. In inner life, we often exhaust ourselves by tracing every feeling backward. Why am I sad? Where did it begin? What happened before? But there are states that have no clear origin. They appear like mist in the night, and the only thing needed is to be with them without searching. When the universe had no before and after, it was not lacking order. It simply did not yet require that order. And as you hear this in a half-awake, half-dreaming state, your mind may no longer need to understand anything further. You do not need to attach every thought to a coherent story. You do not need to find a beginning for your tiredness. Perhaps you only need to allow yourself to be inside a moment without time, just as the universe once was. Very brief, very still. And from that stillness, everything could unfold. As the story continues to drift toward ideas of the vacuum of fluctuations, of things arising from nothing, you do not need to keep up. Because you have already learned something essential. Not every question needs to be carried to the end of the night. Some questions are born only to be set down, and when you set them down, sleep is no longer a destination, but a very natural state, like time before it ever began. After releasing the question of before and after, accepting that there are boundaries where familiar logic comes to rest, the flow of thought does not fall into silence. It continues very gently into a place that seems the emptiest of all the vacuum. We often think of nothing as absence, as emptiness, as a place where nothing happens. But science whispers something else, that the vacuum is never truly empty, that even when we remove every particle, every ray of light, every trace of radiation, a quiet movement still remains. At the deepest level, space never stands still. In the quantum vacuum, particles appear and disappear unannounced, leaving no trace, born from fluctuating energy and dissolving before they can become things. Not because the universe is chaotic, but because absolute stillness does not exist. As Marcelo Gleiser writes in The Dancing Universe, the void is not empty, it is full of potential. The nothing of science is not nihilism. It is a living state rich with possibility, alive with vibration, filled with what has not yet taken form. If the Planck era is where time has no meaning, then the quantum vacuum is where presence does not yet require shape. There is something quietly comforting in this thought, that even when everything has been taken away, there remains a ground of motion so subtle we barely sense it, yet real enough to give rise to worlds. We are often afraid of emptiness, afraid of silence, afraid of moments when no clear thought arises. But the universe is not afraid. It lives there. Virtual particles are not virtual because they are unreal, but because they do not need to stay. They appear and vanish like a fleeting thought that passes through your mind just before sleep arrives. You do not remember it. You do not need to, yet it was there. In Being and Time, Martin Heidegger wrote, "The nothing nothings." Nothingness is not an object, it is an activity. The vacuum does not stand still, waiting to be filled by the universe. It participates in existence. And perhaps this is where philosophy and science touch the same gentle feeling that life is not only found in what is clear and defined, but in the subtle vibrations beneath all form. Space is always moving, even when nothing seems to be happening, even when we call it silence. That silence is not dead, it breathes. In inner life, we also have our vacuums, moments when we do not know what we are thinking, when no clear emotion appears, when there is no goal. We often label this as emptiness and rush to fill it with noise. But perhaps this is precisely where the mind is rebalancing itself. Like the quantum vacuum, the empty space within you may be far more fertile than it appears. As Fritjof Capra writes in The Tao of Physics, the vacuum is not empty but full of possibilities. The universe does not require a solid foundation to exist, it rests upon fluctuation. And human beings are no different. We do not need to be constantly clear, constantly certain, constantly filled with thought. Sometimes it is enough to allow thought particles to appear and dissolve without holding on to them. The inner space within you may be doing exactly what the universe has done since the beginning. There is a quiet beauty in this suspension, no clinging to form, no forcing of meaning, no demand for conclusions. The vacuum does not ask why it fluctuates, it simply does. And from those fluctuations, everything can arise. As you hear this in the night with your breathing gradually slowing, you may no longer be trying to understand every sentence. You simply let them pass like virtual particles in space, leaving no obligation behind, requiring no memory. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Nowhere you can go is more peaceful, more free of interruptions than your own soul." Yet perhaps the quietest place is not a room nor a clear thought, but a gently moving emptiness. The vacuum is not the absence of everything, it is the presence of possibility. And when your mind settles enough to stop clinging to any single thought, you do not disappear, you simply become more like the universe. As the flow continues toward other dimensions and deeper hidden structures you do not need to follow by effort. You have already learned how to rest within a space that is not empty at all. Sleep arrives not because every thought has stopped, but because none of them need to be held. Like particles appearing and dissolving, your awareness can gently hover within a space that is alive, quiet, and deeply real. After resting within a space that is not empty at all, where gentle fluctuations arise and dissolve without needing a reason, the current of thought opens again, this time in a different direction. Not deeper into the small, but wider into the vast. Not adding noise, only adding dimension. We live in a three-dimensional world, front and back, left and right, up and down. Our bodies are so accustomed to this that we assume reality could only ever be this way. But the universe has no obligation to stop at what feels familiar to us. It may be that space itself is deeper than three dimensions, not in the sense of having more directions to walk, but in the sense of having dimensions that are folded, hidden so small that our senses cannot reach them. String theory tells this story very softly, that what we call particles may be tiny vibrating strings, and the way they vibrate gives rise to every form of matter. For those equations to hold, the universe requires more dimensions, not 4 but 10 or 11. These extra dimensions do not stretch out like length or width. They are curled up like delicate folds within the deepest structure of space. Edward Witten once said in a lecture on string theory, "Physics is about asking the simplest possible questions about the universe." And sometimes the simplest question is, this is what we see truly, all there is. Imagine a creature living on a sheet of paper. To it, the world has only two dimensions, forward and back, left and right. If you lift the paper, that creature does not perceive a third dimension. It only notices things disappearing without understanding why. Perhaps we are in a similar position. Gravity, the weakest of the four fundamental forces, may be the most intriguing clue. Why is it so weak? Why is it so different from the others? One gentle hypothesis suggests that gravity may be leaking into other dimensions that we cannot touch. Not because it is weak, but because it does not remain entirely within the world we perceive. This idea does not require belief, it only asks that imagination open a little further. In Critique of Pure Reason, Immanuel Kant wrote, "Space is not something objective and real, nor a substance, nor an accident, nor a relation. Space is not a box, it is the way we experience existence. And if that way of experiencing is limited by our senses and our language, then reality itself may be far broader. Hidden dimensions do not make this world less real, they make it deeper." Human beings are like this too. We have many dimensions others cannot see: dreams, memories, unnamed fears, thoughts never spoken aloud. They are not meaningless fantasies, they are folded dimensions of the mind, in man and his symbols. Carl Jung wrote, "The psyche is a self-regulating system that maintains its equilibrium just as the body does. Not everything within you needs to be exposed in order to exist. Hidden dimensions do not need to be proven to have value. They only need to be respected as possibility. String theory does not claim that extra dimensions certainly exist. It only suggests that if we allow reality to be more complex, many old questions begin to feel lighter. Perhaps the universe is not hiding from us. Perhaps we are simply not yet equipped to sense it fully. And that is not a flaw. It is the condition for discovery." In The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, Thomas Kuhn wrote, "Normal science does not aim at novelties of fact or theory, and when successful finds none. Only when we allow ourselves to step beyond the familiar do new dimensions appear." But at night, when the aim is not to understand more, but to soften the idea of multiple dimensions can carry a different meaning. That you do not need to live entirely within what others can see. That there are parts of you allowed to remain folded, hidden, and still completely real. You do not need to explain why you are tired, why you feel empty, why you feel deep. Perhaps these are simply dimensions language has not yet reached. As the flow continues toward ideas of parallel possibilities and other universes, you do not need to follow by effort. Right now, only one small thing is needed to allow imagination to open without demanding a conclusion. Space may be deeper than 3 dimensions. Human beings may be too. And as you lie still letting awareness soften, you may not travel to another dimension, but you can touch the feeling that reality is wider than what needs to be understood. Sleep is not the loss of a dimension, it is a gentle shift into another way of being. No map is required, no proof is needed, just a very soft expansion enough for the mind to loosen its grip on the familiar 3 dimensions of worry and wakefulness. And in that expansion, peace arrives, not because everything has been explained, but because you no longer need to live inside a space that is too narrow. After imagination has been gently widened, after we accept that space itself may be deeper than what the senses can grasp. Another thought appears very softly like mist spreading across a night lake. What if the universe is not only one? Not to believe, not to prove, only to allow the idea to exist in the mind as a tender possibility. Science calls it the multiverse. Philosophy names it in many other ways. And in the night, we may simply call it a door left slightly open. There may be many universes, each one a different script. Physical constants slightly shifted, initial conditions subtly altered, outcomes that do not coincide. Somewhere, perhaps, everything unfolded differently, not better, not worse, just different. This thought can feel heavy if we try to grasp it. But if we let it drift, it carries a strange relief.
Because when there are many possibilities, no single choice has to bear the full weight of existence. In The Garden of Forking Paths, Jorge Luis Borges wrote, "Time forks perpetually toward innumerable futures." Not to say that everything is meaningless, but to remind us that one path does not need to be the only path. The multiverse does not deny the value of this universe. It simply suggests that reality may be wider than uniqueness. And strangely, that suggestion brings calm. We often ask ourselves, what if I had chosen differently? What if that day I had turned another way? What if things had not happened like this? These questions can exhaust the mind if we believe there is only one correct version. But if many scenarios exist in parallel not to let us escape but to loosen the burden of being right, then those questions lose their sharpness. They become a cool breeze. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "All things recur eternally, and ourselves with them, and we have already existed times without number." However one understands this idea, it softens the notion of a single unrepeatable chance. Perhaps not every mistake needs to be corrected. Not every regret needs an exit. Because somewhere other possibilities may exist quietly without asking you to become them. The multiverse does not require you to believe that another you is living elsewhere. It simply invites you to stop thinking that you must be the one perfect version of every possibility. In The Plurality of Worlds, David Lewis wrote, "Ways things could have been are ways things are in some other worlds." This sentence is not meant to complicate everything. It makes things lighter. If there are many worlds, then this world does not need to carry the entire burden of proving that it is the best. It only needs to be the world that is happening. The feeling of this chapter is not overwhelm. It is a very gentle sense of wonder, like looking up at the sky and realizing that the stars do not require you to understand them in order to shine. The multiverse, if it exists, does not need your belief to exist. It only asks that imagination not be closed tight. In The Tao of Physics, Fritjof Capra wrote, "The universe is seen as a dynamic web of interrelated events." If everything is a dynamic web, then one branch cannot represent the entire tree, and neither can you. You do not need to carry on your shoulders everything you could have been. You only need to carry what you are. The idea of many universes can make us feel small, but it can also dissolve a very tiring illusion that every decision is absolute. You do not need to believe in the multiverse to feel this. You only need to allow the idea to remain in the night like a dream that does not yet require interpretation. As you lie listening to this story with your breathing slowing, you may no longer be trying to decide what is real and what is not. Because in sleep, reality does not need to be singular. It only needs to be gentle enough that the mind no longer has to defend itself. If there are many universes, then not everything depends on you. And if there is only one universe, allowing other possibilities to exist is still enough to lighten the heart. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "Accept the things to which fate binds you and love the people with whom fate brings you together." However many universes there may be, you are here, in this night, in this breath, with no need to go anywhere else. As the flow continues toward questions of fine-tuning of why everything is just right for life, you do not need to prepare. Because you have already learned a gentle way of being with vast possibilities, without tension, without assertion, without denial. Only allowance. And in that allowance, sleep does not arrive as an ending, but as another version of consciousness, where every possibility is permitted to pass through without requiring choice. If the universe is not only one, then tonight you do not need to live fully inside all of them. You only need to rest within one very gentle possibility, eyes closing, listening to the vast silence surrounding you.
After allowing the idea of many universes to exist, without believing and without denying, the current of thought gradually slows. It no longer expands across the horizontal spread of possibilities, but settles inward toward a question that is deeply human, ancient, and gentle. Is this universe tuned for life? Looking around, everything seems just right. Gravity is not so strong that everything collapses, nor so weak that stars cannot form. The physical constants fall within a very narrow range, enough for carbon to exist, enough for complex chemistry to unfold, enough time for life to emerge. This feeling easily leads us to think that we stand at the center of a grand design, that this universe has a purpose, that everything was arranged to lead to us. But the anthropic principle whispers something different, softer, less dramatic, and therefore more soothing. It does not say that the universe was created for life. It simply says, we are here because this is a place that allows us to be here. If the conditions were different, we would not be here to ask the question, not because the universe failed, but because the questioner would never appear. In A Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking wrote, "The universe does not allow perfection. The universe is not optimized for a goal, it is simply consistent with itself. And life within that picture is not a pinnacle, but a possible outcome when conditions happen to align." There is something deeply calming in this view. You do not need to be special in order to exist. You do not need to be chosen. You do not need to carry a cosmic mission. You are here because circumstances allow you to be here, and that is already enough. Human beings often search for grand meaning to justify their existence, but the anthropic principle gently invites us to loosen that need. Not because life is meaningless, but because meaning does not have to be vast in order to be lived. In The Myth of Sisyphus, Albert Camus wrote, "The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. No metaphysical reason is required for the heart to be full. If there are many universes, then this universe is simply one of the places where random conditions happen to fall within a life-permitting range. If there is only one universe, then the fact that the constants landed there does not necessarily carry a message. It simply happened. Neither view takes away the value of life. They only remove the burden of having to be exceptional, and that is a relief." In Ethics, Baruch Spinoza wrote, "The more we understand individual things, the more we understand God. Understanding that we are not the center does not make us smaller. It places us where we truly are, very real, very fragile, and therefore very precious. When we no longer believe the universe was made to serve us, we can love it without trying to possess it. When we no longer think life is the ultimate goal, we can live without fearing that we are failing. The universe makes no promises. It simply opens conditions. And within a very narrow band of possibility, life arises like a flower growing from a crack in stone. Not because the stone wanted a flower, but because water, light, and time happened to meet. Human beings are the same. You do not need to believe that you were chosen. You only need to acknowledge that you are allowed to exist." In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. It was not perfect order, but a just enough measure of chaos that gave rise to everything." When told in a gentle voice, the anthropic principle is not a dry scientific argument. It is a soft reminder: do not project onto the universe the expectations you carry within yourself. Life does not need a grand purpose to have value. Sleep does not need an epic story to arrive. In the night after your mind has traveled through parallel possibilities, hidden dimensions, and fluctuating emptiness, this thought may help you set yourself down. You do not need to become more in order to deserve existence. You do not need to be perfect for the universe to hold you. You are here because this is a place that allows you to breathe, to think, to feel, and then to rest. As the flow continues toward more familiar worlds, the moon, Mars, oceans hidden beneath ice, you do not need to feel eager. The feeling of this chapter is not wonder, but peace. Peace in not having to make yourself special. peace in not carrying the meaning of the entire universe, just being a small creature lying still in the night within a universe that promises nothing yet has allowed you to be here. And sometimes being allowed to exist is the greatest gift reality can offer. No further purpose is required. No further explanation is needed. Simply let awareness soften as the constants once softened after a very hot universe, so that life could finally rest within itself. After letting go of the idea that the universe must have a grand purpose, after accepting that life is present simply because conditions allow it, the flow of the story no longer moves outward. It turns back, not toward a center, but toward places very close. Worlds that are not in another universe, not in a hidden dimension, not in a parallel possibility. They are here, within our own solar system, so close that light takes only minutes to travel from them to us. And the strange thing is this: the closer we look, the gentler hope becomes. Not loud, not urgent, not promising, just possible. The moon appears first. An old companion, always there, always silent. It was not born alongside Earth. It came from a collision, a violent moment in the young history of this planet. From that chaos, a satellite formed, stabilizing the orbit, regulating the tides, keeping rhythm for long cycles. There is something deeply human in this story, that stability can arise from disruption, that not every collision is destruction. As Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "What stands in the way becomes the way."
The moon does not carry life, but it carries conditions. Conditions that allowed Earth to become stable enough, long enough, steady enough for life to emerge. Then the flow moves on to Mars, a planet that was once very much like Earth, with rivers, with lakes, with a thick atmosphere. But Mars lost its magnetic field, lost its ability to hold its gases, lost its water. Not because it was wrong, only because it was smaller, cooled more quickly, could not keep its molten core active as long as Earth did. Mars did not fail. It simply followed a different rhythm. There is something comforting in seeing Mars this way, like a reminder that not every path leads to the same outcome. In The Gay Science, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "One must learn to love, not to love a result, but to love a process." Mars teaches us that a world can bear traces of life without becoming a living place. Then we leave dry surfaces behind and go deeper beneath the ice. Europa, a moon of Jupiter, from afar looks like a white sphere fractured by blue cracks. But beneath its thick shell of ice lies an ocean, salty, deep, active. It does not need sunlight. It does not need a warm surface. It needs only water, heat, and time. Enceladus, a small moon of Saturn, whispers even more clearly. Jets of water erupt from its fractures, carrying salt and organic molecules, as if the ocean below were introducing itself without being asked. Here, life does not require light. It can exist around hydrothermal vents sustained by chemistry, by motion. As Hans Jonas wrote in The Phenomenon of Life, "Life is not a thing, but a happening. Life is not a fixed form, it is a process of adaptation." And when we look at these nearby worlds, hope no longer takes the shape of finding others. It becomes hope that life may be more flexible than we once thought. It does not need to resemble us. It does not need golden light or blue skies. It needs only the right conditions in another form. The feeling here is not excitement, it is slow. There is no need to rush toward answers, no need to confirm, no need to declare. The oceans beneath the ice have existed for billions of years. They do not require our attention in order to exist. As Martin Heidegger wrote in Being and Time, being reveals itself in concealment. Some things can exist only when hidden. Perhaps life is like that too.
And in inner life, this gentle hope can touch something very deep, that not every way of living needs to be visible, not every potential needs light. There are parts of you that are living very truly beneath the ice of exhaustion, beneath old habits, beneath silence. They do not need to be excavated. They only need time and the absence of urgency. These nearby worlds do not promise that we will find life. They simply remind us that the possibility of existence is less fragile than we imagine. And that is enough to lighten the heart. As the flow approaches the final chapter, the great silence, the paradox of hearing no one, you do not need to worry. Because before facing that silence, you have passed through places that are close, real, and patient. Hope here is not a promise. It is a permission for life to have many ways of existing, permission for you not to rush into becoming something else. Like oceans beneath ice, you can rest within a hidden yet living stillness. No light is required, no affirmation, only time and a night quiet enough that hope no longer needs to speak. After coming very close through oceans hidden beneath ice, through worlds that do not need light, through the gentle hope that life may exist in more ways than we once imagined, the flow of the story finally reaches a vast stillness. Not a wall, not a conclusion, but the great silence. In science, it is called the Fermi paradox. A question so simple, it sounds like a sigh in the night. If the universe is so vast, if life can arise in many places, then where is everyone? There is no certain answer, only possibilities set out as lightly as distant stars. Perhaps there is no one at all. The universe is immense but intelligent. Life is rarer than we think. Perhaps there are others, but the distances are too great, the signals too weak, the timing misaligned. Perhaps they were there long ago and passed through their signaling phase before we learned how to listen. Or perhaps they are watching as we once stood silently before an untouched landscape, not rushing to step inside. Or perhaps, and this is the gentlest thought of all, we are not yet ready to hear. This silence easily unsettles us. We are used to noise, to feedback, to sending something out and receiving something back. But the universe does not move to that rhythm. Carl Sagan once wrote in Cosmos, "The universe is a pretty big place. If it's just us, seems like an awful waste of space." That line is often read as a call to search, but it can also be read as a very different reminder that the universe does not exist to answer our loneliness. And if we stay with that long enough, it is no longer frightening. Because silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is a pause. In Being and Nothingness, Jean-Paul Sartre wrote, "Silence is the condition of speech. Without silence, there is no word. Without space, there is no meaning." Perhaps the universe is silent not because there is nothing to say, but because the time has not yet come. Like an adult who does not rush to answer a child, knowing the answer requires more than information. Or like ourselves when we are not yet ready to hear something too large for us to carry. Humanity has only just begun to learn how to listen to one another, only just begun to learn not to turn difference into threat. Perhaps the universe is silent because it knows that listening is a skill that takes time. In the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu wrote, "Silence is a source of great strength." The great silence is not a verdict. It is an open space. It does not force a conclusion. It does not demand that we choose one possibility. It simply invites us to remain with the question without feeling deprived. There is something deeply healing in accepting that we are not the center of all signals, that the universe has no obligation to reassure us that our presence does not require confirmation from anyone else to have value. In Meditations, Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Receive without pride, let go without attachment." If there is someone out there, they do not make us more important. If there is no one at all, we do not become meaningless. This silence does not diminish our story. It simply places it within a wider context. And in that context, there is no need to hurry, no need to fill the night with hypotheses, no need to turn fear into conclusions. Sometimes what is most profound is not an answer, but the ability to rest with a question. Like lying in the night, no longer trying to understand more, no longer trying to extract meaning, simply letting the breath slow and awareness soften. The universe says nothing in that moment, and you do not need to speak either. The great silence is not the end of the journey. It is the place where the journey is allowed to rest. There is no next chapter, nothing left to prove. Only a wide calm surrounding every question that has been asked. If there is someone out there, they do not need you to stay awake waiting. If there is no one, this night is still complete. Because you have traveled very far, not to find others, but to remain with yourself without feeling alone. And as the story closes within this silence, sleep does not arrive as an escape, but as a gentle dissolving into a universe that asks nothing more of you. Just listen, not for a signal, but for the quiet spreading very slowly within you. And in that quiet, every possibility, someone out there, no one at all, or simply waiting, can coexist without keeping you awake. Because in the end, the great silence does not ask who you are. It simply is, wide, light, and quiet enough to allow you to rest. And then as this journey slows, not because it has reached an end, but because there is nothing left that needs to be carried, you can allow the ideas you have just heard to dissolve very gently. You do not need to hold on to the concepts. You do not need to remember what percentage of the universe is dark matter. You do not need to distinguish between one universe and many. You do not need to find an answer to the great silence. They have already completed their task, not to explain the world, but to open a space wide enough for the mind to rest. The universe does not require you to keep pace with it. It was unfolding long before there were questions, and it will continue unfolding long after all answers have settled. In this moment, you do not need to be an observer. You do not need to be a consciousness trying to understand. You only need to be a very small part, gently supported by the familiar rhythms of reality, the slow turning of the planets, the subtle stretching of space, and the breath in this room becoming steadier. If anything remains after the story, it may not be new knowledge, but a very simple feeling that you are not standing outside the universe, watching it pass. You are inside it. You are being carried by it. And in a very real way, you have never been left behind. There is no need for more hypotheses, no need for more signals. Only allow the silence to spread very slowly. If your eyes feel heavy, let them close. If thoughts are still drifting, let them drift on without holding them. The universe is still there. And tonight, so are you, only quieter.